So you did HBO Max, I did theater. What'd you think?
So when I was watching it, I was like, gosh, this really does feel like I could see myself in the cinema watching this. I kind of went into it thinking this is going to be a 2-hour Sopranos episode. And so I have no problem watching it on HBO Max. I mean,
that's the only way we've ever consumed it. It's on our televisions.
Correct. So, I had no problem with it, but watching it, you can clearly see that, this is something that they wanted the audiences to see in the cinema, just the way it was filmed and the mood and the pacing and all of that. So I'm not sure if my opinion would have changed had I seen it in the theater. And at the same time, I didn't really have high expectations of the movie going into it, not necessarily anything against expanding on the Sopranos story, but just my general dislike of prequels anyway. I always feel like they're telling a story we already know. Now, what some prequels try to do is they try to not rewrite history, but reveal a secret that the characters in the present day and thus the audience didn't know. And so the prequel reveals something new that we didn't realize was true. And in this scenario, which I'm sure we'll get into probably a little more as we talk through some of the other things that led up to it. One, Silvio has a hairpiece. And two,
I don't know how big of a secret that was.
Well, I mean, Stevie Van Sant, that was no secret, but we always thought it was part of the character, and I imagine it was intended that way. And they thought, hey, let's do an homage. It doesn't really retcon the character that this whole time Silvio's been wearing a wig. It was a welcome reference to the actor who played Silvio, so that was fine.
Yeah.
One of the things that concerned me right off the bat was that I was always under the impression, and I've seen The Sopranos a few times over, so it's possible I missed something, but I was pretty confident in my interpretation that Tony and Silvio and Pussy were like all classmates, and they were within a year or two of each other's age. And Paulie was kind of, that surrogate older brother, kind of that generation between Tony and Tony's father. Kind of that big brother type of person. And in this movie, I mean, they paint it like Silvio and Pussy are within range of Paulie's age. And I feel like that was kind of surprising. And I'm not sure if it is a contradiction on what the TV series established, but I found that a bit distracting. And it makes Tony almost, if he's so much younger than him, it just makes it look like he kind of dethrones them in a way. He passes them over once he actually becomes boss, and that this whole crime family thing that we've grown to love for 86 episodes is all about nepotism, because it passed on to Junior and then passed on to Tony. And so when there's this huge age gap between Tony and then the guys following him, and the guys who are following him are much older than him in age, it kind of changes the dynamic of that a bit. So that was kind of the first thing that really was like, okay.
Well, first I'm going to just go to the way. I agree. It definitely feels like a movie. It doesn't feel like a TV show that you just threw in a movie theater. And I personally always prefer the theater experience, because you get like people in the theater who are assholes who start talking or whatever, which I didn't have that. But I always have less of a likelihood to go. Like, I can't pause in a movie, so I'm not going to go, oh, I'm going to get up and go to the bathroom, I'm going to do whatever. And it always kind of takes me out of stuff when I watch things at home. So I do think if you decided to on the theater, maybe you would have gotten a little bit more of it out of it from that sense. But I agree 100% about the age thing, to the point where on the way home, I was looking up ages. So for example, like little Steven is, I think, 11 years older in real life than Gandolfini was, which obviously when you're talking about 11 years, you can always go, okay, but Tony's playing 5 years older, Silvio's playing 5 years younger. So there's really only like a year and a half gap between the characters' ages. But I remember when we were first discussing the casting of Michael Gandolfini, I remember you and I were kind of going, they're going to have to kind of flub with his age a little bit, because, it was just sort of off. So I went into it with the attitude of, all right, this is not going to be completely accurate date-wise as far as who's a certain age at a certain year. And I'm just going to kind of suspend my disbelief and just go with it. But yeah, no, I'm with you 100% that it feels very odd. And there is nepotism to be expected in situations like that with the mob, I would imagine. Yeah, it does definitely feel odd when you stop and go, all right, when Tony's what's he supposed to be, about 16 in this movie? And Silvio and Polly and Puss are all at least 10 years older than him, which Polly, I agree. It's like you kind of always kind of thought that with Polly. Silvio and Puss, you always kind of figured were either the same age or at the very least, when he was a sophomore in, high school, they'd already graduated or something, they're a lot closer than they actually were. So I agree with you on that it definitely kind of throws you for a bit of a loop when you're watching the movie in that sense. And it might repaint how you watch the show, but I don't think the show at any point came out and ever said like, Puss is 12 years older than, Tony, for example. So you can get away with it, but I think it'll definitely repaint any future viewings I see based on that.
Yeah. I mean, when, they whack Pussy, it's so hard to say it without laughing.
Yeah, I know, right?
I mean, they talk about him like he's a brother. And so if Tony didn't actually get close to him until he was in his late teens, early 20s, I feel like that does repaint a lot of things. I feel like there was always, in the show, they talk about how, Silvio and Jackie Aprile Sr. and Tony had their gang growing up. And that's really not what we see. If anything, we see Tony and one scene where they're hijacking the ice cream truck with Jackie Aprile. Silvio's not there. I think the kid driving it is Artie. I don't remember.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Because yeah. So, I mean, that's my point, is that in the show, they brought up that Pussy was this huge betrayal that, Tony kind of always knew him. And that's not really the case. They didn't come close until Tony was at least in his late teens. So that repaints that dynamic. And then Tony and Silvio were always kind of painted as almost inseparable. They were always together in this thing. So I still feel like that paints it. Now, Polly, in the show, they specifically did go into how Polly was more kind of one of Johnny Boy's guys, So, and I don't think anything about Polly's character is ruined out of this movie. And I don't really think any characters in particular are ruined within this movie, but it does kind of repaint, like I said, some dynamics in the chemistry that the characters have. Aside from Silvio actually talking to Dickie at the end, those three characters, Pussy, Polly, and Silvio, they have no purpose in that movie. It was almost like a wink to the camera. And I think that's kind of some of the movie's biggest flaws, is that it was unfocused.
I agree with you on the winking and nodding to the audience. That's what it felt like to me numerous times with Silvio, Polly, the Carmela parts, where it's just I can watch that guy doing a SNL Silvio impression and know it's Silvio. Mm-hmm. But it felt like every chance they had, nobody would just go like, "Hey, you come over here." They'd go, "Hey, Silvio, the character from the Sopranos, come over here." And it just took me out of almost every moment like that, which is where I was actually somewhat impressed with the Artie thing, like you were saying, was how you weren't sure if that was Artie or not. And the only way I even figured out that was Artie was because the scene where you see him and Tony like getting off the bus, and he says like, your Uncle Dickie's so cool, and I want to be like you guys when I grow up, but my dad says I have to take over his restaurant. And I'm like, okay, that's obviously Artie. And I don't think they ever actually say Artie. But I sit there and go, okay, well, as somebody who's seen the show, which I assume 90% of the people in this auditorium have, your brain will instantly go, okay, well, that's Artie. That makes sense. You don't need to say, all right, Artie, like 50 times for me to understand who it is. So yes, the movie definitely doesn't, I don't know if I want to say doesn't have faith in the audience, because I feel like if you were just such a casual, like I've seen like 5 episodes of The Sopranos, them even saying the name Silvio is not going to mean. If you know, you know. If you don't know, it doesn't matter. And yeah, a lot of that felt that way. And it felt that they made their artistic choices to age up people a little bit so we could have more cameos in this movie. But yeah, like you said, it's like Silvio, Polly. I mean, honestly, the only thing with Polly I really even remember is when he's all like, I just got this suit, messed up that guy's teeth. Yeah, like I wouldn't even have thought of that being Polly outside of like that one moment. So he's not even needed.
I feel like, Polly could have been put to better use because he was already pre-established as being part of Johnny Boy and Dickie's crew on the show. Whereas, they gave Silvio something of importance to do, at least at the end of the movie. But I feel like that could have been swapped for Polly and just cut out Pussy and Silvio.
You could have merged Silvio and Puss and Polly all into one character. He's very easily done. I understand why you did it too. You make this to, the pro wrestling term is, pop the crowd, get that big cheer. And I will say the people who I saw this with, everything that was intended to like get the crowd to laugh or like, really go, I get that reference, really seemed to land. I saw it coming from a mile away and I laughed at it when, for no reason whatsoever, we cut to Junior telling young Janice, your brother doesn't have the makings of a varsity athlete. And it's like, yeah, I laughed and it's cheap and it's whatever. But I could definitely tell like that's what you guys are here for, it to like really make the fans go, I get that reference. I know that character. Some parts it worked. Some parts I thought was kind of cringe.
So a good way to do a prequel is one of the couple of prequels I can think of that are really, really good. And they're few and far between. And I don't mean to talk about X-Men's, Days of Futures Past. I have never seen that, but it's not like there's a consensus that the prequel is the best in the series. I mean, the only time I really hear that is The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is a prequel to Fistful of Dollars, but you'd never know that because you don't need to see any of the other ones. They don't make any sort of reference aside from Clint Eastwood's character is the same character. It just takes place before those events. The Godfather 2, the Robert De Niro portions of the movie, that's really to help contrast. But again, that's kind of in the context of a sequel. So if this movie either served as a complete standalone or helped do something to contrast with the TV series, it would have been much better. But I think it was trying to have its cake and eat it too, if you will, that it was trying to stand on its own, but then making too many references that would only occur if it were trying to milk the Sopranos fame. I think it would have benefited if it tried to appeal to people who haven't seen The Sopranos, and it's already built a pretty in-depth universe. So, just use the pieces on the board where they're necessary, and the actual fans will appreciate what's there. Because what's going to happen is that people in general, fandom in general nowadays, they're too self-aware of when they're being pandered to, that this type of thing just doesn't work anymore. So, throwing this reference here, that character there, it just doesn't work anymore. People know what you're doing. So I think the opportunity was there and it was lost in many forms. I think because Dickie Moltisanti was such a mysterious character in The Sopranos, exploring who he was, what he contributed to the world that we know, was a really interesting idea, and the influence he had over Tony. But I don't think the plot really knew where it was going, and it was spread all over the place. And it wasn't an overall interesting movie. It should have aspired to be, Goodfellas was an interesting movie. Godfather was an interesting movie. These mob movies, they are interesting on their own. And Many Saints of Newark is, if anything, only interesting if you've seen The Sopranos. And that's bad form, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, first, in reference to the first point you made about the prequels, one, yes, most people do genuinely think X-Men, First Class, and Days of Future Past are some of the best in that series. But unlike The Sopranos, the X-Men had gone so far off the rail of like those movies being good and even making sense in the prior one that happened, that people were just like, I don't care if this doesn't line up with what I saw in 2000. I just want to be here for an actual good movie, and that's what this is. But yes, I agree with you of like the, Godfather 2, things like that versus like, obviously you have like the Star Wars prequels, which are, some of the worst, big name movies ever made. But I do disagree about the pandering thing and fandom to a certain extent, with the idea that sometimes I feel with certain fan bases, and I won't get too deep into them, pandering seems to be what they want. They want that familiar, blanket of, oh yay, Rogue One is the best Star Wars movie in 2 decades because Darth Vader shows up with a lightsaber and kills a bunch of people, which is a great scene. It's entertaining, but like it's not all that deep. But it's like, this is what you did with your toys when you were a kid. Fan service in and of itself isn't a bad thing. It's just when it's kind of poorly done fan service. Like I said, if I test it from was the audience into it, I would have to give this a thumbs up. because the audience was pretty clearly into it. There was maybe 10 people in there at 12:30, but they were reacting. I don't know. To me, like I said, I laughed at, little fan servicey line about the being a varsity athlete or whatever. I thought it was funny. I was like, okay, that's cute, whatever. But yeah, I would have greatly appreciated it if you'd given me a new moment from Uncle Junior that I could then quote forever, as opposed to repeating the one moment we've had from Uncle Junior that we still quote all these years. You know what I mean? Like, give me a new iconic moment from him. Don't just go like, remember when he said this thing? Well, he also said it 30 years prior, and it's really funny still. But I don't know. Give me something else.
I think we, in some form, agree and in another form disagree on this. I think what I'm trying to say, I think you're absolutely right that if they don't do fan service, then people are going to also get pissed off. But what I am saying is that if they get a fan service that is either cliche or predictable, they're going to also get pissed off. And I feel like that's what happened here. On top of which, this is The Sopranos. This is the series that ended in a cut to black. This is a series.
They had no problem pissing off the audience.
Right, they had no problem pissing off the audience. They want to do what's best for the story. And the same thing. This is also written by David Chase, not only the creator of The Sopranos, but also David Chase chose not to reintroduce the Russian because audiences would love it. And so I just feel like there is no room for fan service in this type of movie, particularly if it was written by David Chase. Now, if J.J. Abrams came along and, rewrote The Sopranos like he did with Star Wars, then I could see something like this happening. And I could say, okay, let me step back. This isn't, the original person. So there's going to be some changes, all that. But this was David Chase's idea. It seems so un-Sopranos for the amount of fan service we got. I shouldn't be distracted by those type of things. I should be focused on the story. And I was really more focused on what Sopranos reference are they going to make next. I mean, they have the car ride after Tony and his friends hijack, the ice cream truck. And, we get that infamous bullet through the beehive hairdo that,
Yes.
If I remember correctly, I could be wrong on this, but I don't think it was Dickie who was there. I think it was supposed to be Junior who was there, and the story was told by Janice in Soprano home movie. But then again, Janice wasn't there, so maybe she, the argument is she misheard the story. But the reason Olivia finds out about this is through Tony Blundetto, Tony's cousin, who was played by Steve Buscemi in the 5th season. And it's like, okay, so mobster Tony B ratted out his cousin, mobster Tony S. It feels like they didn't think about that. Cousins who were supposedly inseparable as kids told on his cousin to his aunt. That seemed out of character. And this is a character that didn't even appear in the movie. So it was just too many winks at the camera for me.
Yeah, no, and you make an interesting point about like the and I wonder if this is where the studio may have kind of stepped in. It's clear whether you like it or not, but the reason why JJ really had to play it safe with Star Wars is because they fucked up so badly on the prior 3 that it was like we got to know we're giving the people what they like, and I can appreciate how David Chase, kind of like how they did on Seinfeld, how you can do a ending that's going to piss a lot of people off because, well, it's the ending. I don't need you coming back next season. If this pisses you off so bad that you're done with the show's done. So I don't really care. There's a part of me that does wonder if maybe there was some studio meddling or even David Chase on his own, because you hear all these stories of people who, from stuff 13 years ago or 14 years ago that, the internet really made them sad when they put their art out they thought was going to be really good. And then you go, okay, now amplify how much worse that is in 2021. Like Sam Raimi was just talking about how much Spider-Man 3 stunk, and the internet was not nearly what it was in 2007 as to what it is now. So I could see a situation where, though David Chase doesn't strike me as a guy who'd really care, but maybe he was kind of stung by the amount of people who go like, oh, The Sopranos was so good and they screwed it up so bad at the end that maybe he thought like, okay, I got to kind of give these people a little too much ice cream to go with their vegetables so they can really like take down the vegetables really well. So I'm just going to give them all the sweet stuff they want is going to come at the end. And I wonder if maybe that was him or the studio. or the co-writer, who I think was also a writer on the show.
Yeah, Lawrence Connor. I don't remember seeing that name before. So so they got the old crew back, if you will. So
yeah, so I could see a situation where maybe if somebody, like I said, either the studio or the people actually making the project actually sat and kind of thought, okay, we have to kind of hold people's hands through this, which brings me to one thing I was actually kind of surprised by, where the marketing, I feel, kind of misled us as to what this actually was. And I had no problem with it at the end because I thought it worked out well enough. But I wonder how much of this changed from the idea of, I just want to tell the story of Dickie Moltisanti, and we'll go ahead and toss in maybe, a Johnny Boy, Olivia, and maybe like one or two other people, to, all right, let's just completely have fun here and bring back almost every character who would have potentially been alive at that point in time when they cast Michael Gandolfini, because the marketing definitely made you think, even though his name comes up late in the credits, but I also figured that was because he's not actually famous, though there aren't a lot of famous people in this movie. I was wondering if you thought that they maybe thought, okay, as soon as we got Michael Gandolfini, this is just now going to become a different thing, because the marketing makes you think that he's like the co-star of that movie.
Yeah, but it's marketing. In my opinion, I think they did their job to market it as that. You're getting butts in seats, which is completely fine, because marketing should not necessarily make any sort of big promises to the audience. It should compel the audience to see a movie, which is exactly what it did. Now, like if, they marketed Terminator 2 as Arnold being the bad guy again, and then you go in and it's like, surprise, he's actually programmed to save John Connor. That's not a bad thing against the marketing. Audiences should genuinely be surprised in movies, and trailers shouldn't give anything away. And I think Hollywood marketing has found that audiences don't like that, and that audiences are more prone to dislike a movie if they go in thinking it's one thing and it turns out to be another thing, which is why they advertised that Arnold was going to be the good guy in this installment. And so I think that does a big disservice. I don't really judge anything based on marketing, but I've heard talk about how Money, That's What I Want used in the trailer. Was that a good choice or a bad choice? I'm like, who cares? Are you not going to see the movie now?
That stuff I think is ridiculous. But I mean it more from the sense of, if initially they were going to tell a story where Tony's going to be in like 2 scenes as a teenager, and then the studio is kind of like, yeah, but if you build up his, his character a little bit more, then we can do enough to where we can really, spin this as the, origins of Tony Soprano's story. And then that way you can fit in this and this. And then I kind of wonder if that's where they kind of went, okay, well, if we go that route, we can also toss this in, and we can kind of toss this in. Because honestly, I was kind of happy to see that the marketing kind of left enough to kind of surprise me. Like, for example, I'd read this a few days prior. I don't know why I'd forgotten it, but I didn't realize, despite having actually read about it and totally forgot it, that Ray Liotta was playing twin brothers.
What did you think of Michael Imperioli's, his narration?
Narrates. Well, that was another one that I'd read a few weeks ago, and I totally forgotten about it.
Yeah, I didn't know about it at all. I mean, I kind of stayed away from all of this so that I would try and be genuinely surprised, because I don't like to judge things before I see them. But I mean, it's a prequel. I don't have a high respect for prequels anyway. So I was like, let me stay away from this as much as possible so I can truly be surprised at some of the stuff. And I was really surprised at how they incorporated him into the movie.
I liked it as a touch because there was nobody else who could really go back and tell that story. Because did you hear about the deleted original opening?
What I did hear about was Edie Falco.
That's what I'm talking. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Did they give an in-depth explanation on what exactly that was?
They haven't said what it was, but my brain initially thought it was going to be something like this, because apparently it wasn't even a case of, well, we reached out to her and she said she'd do it. It's like, no, she got into the Carmela type clothes and makeup and hair and all that. She came down, filmed a scene as Carmela that they were going to use as, the opening, or maybe both as like actual bookends to the actual movie. They've never said what it was, but my initial thought as soon as I heard that was it was going to be her at Tony's grave.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It's going to be something in relation to Tony's death, which is leave it alone.
Which okay. Honestly, on one hand, as soon as I heard, Edie Falco shot something for this, and we're not going to get it in the movie, I initially got super bummed because it was like, I love Edie Falco. She's amazing in that role. And as far as like a fan servicey thing, she literally doesn't even have to even say a word. She could just stand there looking at the grave site, and that's all you really need to know. That to me was a fan service thing of like, I would have loved to have seen that. How can you take that from us? Part of the reason I think they pulled it was, one is either Chase didn't want to commit to Tony being dead, or they have plans for follow-up movies, and they maybe thought, well, you know what, we can save this one for the sequel, or even a trilogy of these older stories. I've seen people use the term retcon, and to me it's like, I don't like when we talk about retconning things unless we know for 100% certainty the facts of the entire story, and a sequel or whatever, or a prequel, completely ignores them and tells you something different, and doesn't say like, and I made this person think this is what happened. But when we found out that Junior was the one who put the hit out on Dickie, leads me to think that we're going to get a little more of this, where we can explore the fact of, when Tony told Christopher, how his dad was killed, which it's how it happened. Though we never found out if that was a cop, though, right? Like, that was just a random guy who pops up and shoots Dickie in the end of the movie. I feel like they're going to want to explore that in like a follow-up of a college age Tony, and we can learn if Junior bullshitted him or he didn't, and he was bullshitting Christopher. So as far as like leaving something open, I kind of actually like that aspect of it. What did you think of that whole repainting of the history that we know?
So I was expecting something along the lines of that, in the sense that we're going to get something about this story that there's no way we could know before that we know now.
Yeah.
So there was some sort of secret, and it just, once Junior slipped, oh man, I was cracking up. That was a well executed scene.
I loved it. Yeah.
When it first happened, like, everyone was concerned about it, and I was like, why am I cracking up? Am I not supposed to be laughing right now? And then Dickie's cracking up, and then Junior just starts glaring at Dickie. I was like, okay, I know where this is going. I think it's a cheap shot in the sense that, one, it was predictable. Two, it's just such a cliche to try and add this element of, hey, no one could have possibly known this during The Sopranos, so this movie has a purpose to exist. I just thought it was weak. I also thought that Junior was at his most compelling when he was secretly a nice guy, in the sense, because everyone knows Junior's a prick, and what Junior did was, Dickie was not a good guy, but Junior hiring the hit on Dickie was a dick move. But the thing about Junior that's really compelling is that at the end of it all, Junior forgets everything. He winds up in this home, and when Janice comes to visit him, he doesn't remember her. He remembers Olivia and thinks that Janice is Olivia. But as many of the conflicts as Junior and Tony had, Junior still remembers Tony, and Junior still remembers playing catch with Tony. And I remember when, I think it was season 5 or something, when Junior really starts to go off the rails. Tony says, why can't you remember anything good? And Junior starts to cry. And the last time we actually see Junior, which is also when Tony goes to visit him, that is the one thing that Junior remembers, is playing catch with Tony. And Tony is the only person that Junior recognizes. And so I feel like there was always a little bit of that element there to Junior, even from the very beginning. Back in season 2, when Junior slips in the bathtub and calls on Tony to help them, even though they're feuding, Junior convinces Tony to forgive his mother. So Junior across the board is a prick, but there's these little cracks of humanity in him. And so I feel like it didn't really serve the character anything to have him involved in Dickie's death. It didn't make me feel anything, and I felt they were going for this jaw-dropping moment, and it was like, Junior would totally do this, and it doesn't really interest me. What would interest me is if Junior did something very nice and no one ever knew about it, because there were definitely elements of that there in the series. And I think what may have happened is that Dominic Chinese
Yes.
Did such a great job with Junior, and Junior was such a great character. But right after Junior shoots Tony, they brush Junior to a very supporting role. We only see him maybe a handful of times again in the series. And I feel like maybe David Chase wanted to compensate that and give Junior a much more significant part in this movie, and it was kind of just shoehorned in there. I'm going to say I don't really like it.
It definitely felt like they were trying to find an ending, where they maybe didn't have one. Where I don't know, if you'd set this up as like a trilogy of films and this happened in like the second one, I think maybe it would have landed a little bit better. So we could have just kind of spent a little more time, because like honestly, I really liked the actor who was playing Dickie, and I liked the character well enough. To me, it was one of those ones where I'm gonna have to go back and watch because like I rewatched all the scenes of Tony telling Christopher what happened and Christopher confronting the cop. But I would like to go back and see how that reshapes maybe some of, Junior, and how, I don't know, because I feel they're going to make another one of these unless it completely tanks the box office and there's no, interest on HBO Max. So to me, I would look at it and go, what's the follow-up? When you're talking about the whole like playing catch with Tony and how if he really steps in as the new surrogate father type character to Tony after, Dickie gets killed, I think that can kind of add a little more depth to it of like, Dickie and Tony clearly had this pretty special relationship. And then if Junior comes in after having gotten him killed and kind of takes over that relationship with Tony, it makes it all a little darker, and it makes it a lot more, any positive feelings Tony has towards Junior are even darker when you realize he killed the man that he actually gave a shit about, because they clearly did not like Uncle Junior in this movie, which, by the way, I think we should get into the casting as well. Let's just go down the list of thumbs up, thumbs down with some of these, because one, we've kind of already agreed, Silvio and Puss and Paulie, those felt like impressions, right? Like they would have made for good SNL skits. They weren't necessarily good characters. Start with the biggest one though. Like, how'd you feel with Michael?
He did a really good job.
Yeah, I even thought the little kid who played little tiny Tony looked so much like AJ.
Oh yeah, that's a good connection. He did look a lot like AJ. Yeah.
And I just kind of thought like, okay, that's kind of cute. Like that he looked just like AJ in season 1, or like, was it season 1 or episode 1 that was filmed like way early? And because wasn't episode 1 filmed like a year before they filmed the rest of the first season? Yeah,
I think episode 1 was filmed in 1997, and then the remainder of the season was filmed in 1999. And you can actually see the difference too.
Well, because in my brain from episode 1, but in episode 1 the whole like, does this mean no F and Z? That's the only part of AJ that I can really remember from the first episode. But yeah, I'm sure if I sat and watched episode 1 and then episode 2, there's like, that kid had a growth spurt. Yeah, Michael, big thumbs up. Next, I would say, what do we think of Vera Formiga as Olivia?
I thought she was really, really good. I think she paid a lot of attention to the mannerisms of the character. I think she nailed it. I think in terms of the voice as well. I think there's a lot of respect for the Olivia Soprano character and that dark cloud that she has over people. And even after she died in the series, she was always kind of there. And they really, David Chase, I think, has a lot of respect for that character, because if I remember correctly, that character is based on his mother. So the script, at least in terms of that character, was written really well. And Vera executed it excellently. I liked her.
Yeah, I kind of judge the performances in this movie on 2 different ways. Like the one, characters that we know, and then even Johnny Boy, because he's not in a whole lot of the flashback scenes, I kind of look as almost like an original character, and I love John Barenthal. Yeah, I thought outside of Michael Gandolfini, I thought Vera Formiga was the strongest performer of the entire film. Quite frankly, like she nailed everything that you think of Olivia that wasn't a SNL impersonation of this character. Like I absolutely adored like when she goes to talk to the principal or whoever's punishing Tony at school, and when the principal's saying how just a loving act with her son meant such a big thing, And when she tries to really be a caring, loving mother, and then Tony just says like one thing that she takes the wrong way, and it all goes out the window.
If I remember correctly, I don't remember Livia Soprano ever referencing Dickie Moltisanti in the series. I feel like that part was, Dickie was one of the few people that Livia respected, and him dying with that medication, that very familiar sounding medication in his pocket.
Yeah.
The fact that she remembers him so poorly is such a Livia thing to do.
Right.
One of his last acts was to get medication that she needed, it dying on him, and her never getting that. It's something that Livia would definitely hold against him, even though the intentions were in the right place.
And I definitely like how that definitely paints the idea of if he'd been able to get her to get on medication and balance herself out a little better, Janice and Tony and their sister, who I honestly almost forgot until I saw how many times was the younger sister in the show? Like 2 or 3?
In the first 3 seasons, that she was probably only on there twice, maybe. And then, she had some smaller roles in the final 2 seasons. She represented the person who got away from it.
Yeah, exactly. But, just thinking like how all 3 of them, not saying that Tony would have lived a honest and clean lifestyle or anything like that, but just how much better off all 3 of them could have been if their mother had actually gotten the help they needed and not been just such a horrible, horrible person to be around. Because just even the minute when Johnny Boy gets home, like within seconds, she's throwing a fit and just going like, I can't imagine the trauma that puts on somebody living in a household like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I loved her. And I thought outside of Michael and outside of the kind of more original characters, and even probably on top of the original characters, I thought she was the best part of the movie. And I've liked her ever since Up in the Air. So it was nice to see her get a shot. But the other big one that I went in low expectations. What did we think of Corey Stoll as Junior?
I liked him. I don't feel like he was anything like the Junior we knew. I don't think he looked anything like him either. Again, this is a guy who's probably 35 years younger than the Junior we got to know. But, there was this posture about Junior that he was kind of the little big man.
I liked him more than I thought I was going to. And I've always liked the actor and anything. I haven't seen him in a bunch of stuff, but I've never disliked the performances that I've seen. There was something about just in the trailers and any like promotional stills I saw of him, definitely felt kind of like somebody who was in a young Uncle Junior Halloween costume. But and like we talked about how like, oh, he didn't look like the actor they used in the flashbacks. It's like, yeah, but we know what young Uncle Junior looks like. He's Johnny Ola. You know what I mean? So it's like in your brain you have a picture of what Dominic looked like when he was around that age. But honestly, if he'd been the weakest part of the younger versions of the cast, I think we'd be talking a much better ways about some of it, because I actually was surprised at how good I thought he was doing as Junior, particularly the scene where he falls down the steps and when he can't make love because he's all messed up. Those to me felt very much like I felt like, okay, this feels like a late 30s, early 40s, whatever, Junior that I wasn't fully expecting it. So to me, it wasn't quite Michael Gandolfini or Vera Formiga, but I liked it more than I thought I was going to like it. So I'd put him the bottom of the thumbs up list. Mm-hmm. And are we forgetting anybody? Because I feel like I'm forgetting another major player, but it's the 3 of them, then the weird Silvio, Puss, Paulie. Like I said, I don't really count Johnny Boy because he wasn't somebody we saw a bunch of times.
Yeah, I guess.
What'd you think of Bernthal on that?
So I liked it because he was incredibly different than the Johnny Boy that we got in the flashbacks. And I think the reason that that's important and that it's different than what I say about Junior is because these flashbacks that we got in the series are from Tony's perspective. And what we learn later on in the series is at the beginning of the series, Johnny Boy was always kind of the good parent from Tony's perspective. But what Tony eventually learns when he meets one of his father's Gumars in, I think it's like the 5th season, is that, oh, you know what? Johnny Boy wasn't there for my mother when she miscarried. That Johnny Boy is not as nice of a guy
No,
as I originally thought. And so having John Bernthal, who's kind of a menacing, he can be very menacing.
very much so.
I thought he was really good. I thought he was a very 180 of what we saw in the series, because in the series we're seeing Tony's perspective. In this movie, we're kind of seeing it from Dickie's perspective. It's interesting to examine how two different perspectives can completely view someone differently.
Well, yeah, like how Tony's always waxing on about, the good old days and back whenever. And it's like, you were a little kid. You don't know how good those good old days actually were, and how your father actually was a terrible person and Dickie really was a terrible person. To you, though, they were, the loving, fatherly figures, or whatever, which is great. But if you'd been even 5 or 6 years older, you could have probably looked at him and gone, "Oh, this isn't nearly as good as my brain has painted them to be." But yeah, I've been a big fan of Barenthal ever since the first 2 seasons of Walking Dead that he was on.
Mm-hmm.
I would say he's the best thing to come out of The Walking Dead. But
I felt like those first 2 seasons were really good, and maybe it's because John Bernthal was in those first 2 seasons. But there is something to be said. I mean, I'm sure this is a different conversation, but maybe there is something to be said when you're rooting for Shane over Rick. Maybe
yeah, exactly right.
So
you probably shouldn't be, but But it was because the fact, though, that like Barenthal is such a good actor and he plays menacing so well in that sense. But I've also seen him in a few things where he's not a bad guy. He's like, just like a, grizzled cop or whatever. And I still go like, I really like this guy. And I think it's a really, I think he's really good. And I really like him in the part. And we've kind of glossed over him a little bit, but like I like Dickie for the most part. I was interested in everything he was doing. What'd you think of Dickie to kind of wrap up the casting?
I mean, honestly, I don't feel like I really got to know a whole lot about him. I just don't think 2 hours was enough.
That's what I meant about how like I would have liked to have seen a little more with this guy, because the little bit that we kind of got I really liked, which makes you wonder if you do a sequel, if you end up doing a prequel within a prequel of flashbacks to earlier things to kind of further sell us on that character, or if it's just like we told you all we want to know about this. But I don't know. You think you thinking sequel, not knowing the money yet?
I don't know. I mean, I'll watch it. I honestly wouldn't be heartbroken. I wouldn't be heartbroken if they didn't make it. But I think, since Ray Liotta's in this movie, I might as well use this as a comparison. I didn't need a limited series or a sequel to get to know his character from Goodfellas. 2.5 hours was enough. So something's amiss with the writing. I didn't really get to know Dickie all that much. And for some of the bad shit he did, he wasn't that interesting of a character for me to care about him. Had he been more charismatic in some form or another, I suppose it would have been much more interesting. But feel like he was a guy that Tony idolized, and Tony did not see all the bad shit he did. And this is kind of just this inside story, an expose, if you will. But it's not really worth a movie, in my opinion, if the movie is about strictly Dickie Moltisanti as the main character. I thought it was an interesting idea on paper. It was more of an execution thing, because we all know how Dickie Moltisanti dies and what comes of his son Christopher and all that. So I think having this self-contained story about Dickie Moltisanti as this tragic figure was actually a great idea. So I don't fault them for making this movie, and I don't think it was necessarily a cash grab, or it didn't need to be that way. But yeah, too many missteps for my liking. One other thing before we start to wrap this up, I thought I would ask what your opinion is. So are they implying that Junior's gay? And if so, does that retcon the character?
Ooh, I never got from the scene of not being able to have sex with his girlfriend.
So a couple of things. So for starters, in the first season, there's an episode called Boca, where
I was going to say the oral sex thing.
Right. Yeah. So Junior.
Okay. So if you put your face down there,
I think that's what the point that his girlfriend was trying to make is. She asks, "Why is this got to be such a secret?" And Junior says, "They think because if you suck on pussy, you'll suck on anything.
Which is so stupid.
And she says, how does that make any sense whatsoever? So
it doesn't.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense to me either as well. And so that's all I've ever thought of it. So that's from the series. And so what goes into the movie is that, when we first meet baby Christopher, Dickie says, see Junior, a son. And it was almost like, Junior's supposed to have a son before Dickie. And, they kind of have this look at each other like, well, why doesn't Junior have any kids? That's weird, and then after that, Junior falls on his ass, like he's getting slammed. I think. I don't want to.
As if there was already damage there to begin with.
I don't want to. It's like I don't want to get too metaphorical, but falling on your ass is like being, slammed on the ass or something like that. And then to top that all off with, his Junior's girlfriend says to him, anything to not have sex. They try it on top, they try it on the bottom, and he gets really, really upset by this. Now, I don't necessarily think that implies that Junior is gay, but I think what that does say is that Junior is so defensive about it, he'll do anything at all to avoid that label. So he dumped his girlfriend in the series because she talked about it, and now because he thinks that Dickie is implying something, and he was laughing about it, that caused Dickie to be killed by Junior.
I think you planted a different idea in my head now with this, as far as any sort of issues with Uncle Junior. The part you were saying about how when he's like, hey, look, Junior, a son, or whatever, right? I did also take that as how when Dickie mentions how his wife can't have kids, which I thought was interesting, because at first when I saw baby Christopher and they jumped ahead a couple of years, I thought, is he with his stepmom now? Because you just said the wife couldn't have kids, but I mean, miracles happen. Obviously, people who can't have kids have them all the time. But he sounded pretty certain about it, so I thought it was like the stepmom's kid for a split second until I saw the mom. Maybe instead it's a case that Junior not being gay, but maybe he's just impotent.
That's true, but I think Junior thinks that because he doesn't have kids, other people might think he.
For sure. The not having kids in that time period and the age he would have been and all that. Yeah, 100%. There would be a definite weird, like, something's going on here, but I think what would be going on there is either he can't get it up, which would explain why he loves going down on women, or he's shooting blanks, which may be a reason why he goes down, so he doesn't have the excuse of, we have traditional sex all the time and I haven't knocked her up yet. It's like, oh, well, I'm doing stuff that doesn't really cause that because I satisfy him another way.
Now, I'm not trying to say that Junior's secretly gay, but I'm saying that Dickie's demise is the result of Junior being so self-conscious about others.
And exactly. But yeah, so I also feel like they wouldn't kind of redo that angle, though. I think it would have been probably more interesting, though, had you. And I love the whole Vito thing at the end of the series, but I do wonder if it would have been made more interesting, though, if it had been a more prominent character had that secret.
Well, so they redid the twins angle with, originally it was Philly and Patsy Parisi in the series, and they redid this with Ray Liotta. I think I need to rewatch some of those scenes specifically, because I feel like there's a deeper meaning, particularly because when Dickie first meets Ray Liotta's, I believe it's Sally is the uncle that he sees in prison. He says, I want to do a good deed. And then he starts bringing these gifts to, like the Miles Davis record. And then Christopher is born. So I want to know if there's like some sort of correlation with Dickie bringing these gifts.
Doing a good deed, and then he gets repaid by actually getting the son that he wanted.
And I wonder if there's any sort of connection to perhaps selling his soul to the devil.
Does it happen before or after the brother says to him, it's the one? No, it was after that, when the brother said that Christopher was born, when the brother's like, no, the wanting is what, the wanting a son isn't a bad thing. It's the wanting.
Yeah.
That is a bad thing. Yeah, no, that's a good point. That didn't really. Seems pretty obvious. I should have picked up on that when I watched it. But yeah, it totally. Like, he goes and sees him, and does his little good deeds for him, but also is being told like, this is a bad angle for you to take. And then it finally happens and he gets what he thinks he wants.
Yep.
All in all, I think you were a little more negative on it than I was. I gave it a thumbs up. I'd go 3.5 out of 5 stars. I enjoyed the story enough. I'll admit being a kind of an easy touch on the sense of even the parts that were a little too fan servicey, I did kind of go like, yeah, but I'm wrapping myself in a nice big Sopranos blanket. You know what I mean? Of like, I'm enjoying this. But for sure, the level of hype that I had from watching those first trailers was for sure not met. And I also question though, did I overhype the whole thing in my brain? Because that show gave us what, 70 some hours of material to love.
86.
Yeah, exactly. And is it 86 total episodes?
Yeah. All about an hour each.
I was going to say, all of them ranging over 45 minutes. It is kind of an impossible, without doing a sequel with the original cast. So you're already going in knowing what you do and don't love. It's kind of an impossible bar to hit, but I liked almost all the performances. I was interested enough in the story. The fan servicey stuff to me was hit and miss. Not to the point where it turned me off and stuff that was a miss, but I'd be very interested to see what they do if they decide to do something with it going forward. But I think I'm going to have my expectations a bit lower, which works in their favor, because then if it's not as good, I'm not going to be as upset. And if it turns out to be really good, then I'm going to be blown away.
So I agree. I'm a little more critical about it than you are, but it's not anything I would dissuade anyone who's seen The Sopranos from seeing. So I've seen much, much worse movies. I wouldn't even really consider this a bad movie because I thought all the acting was really, really good. It was more or less just the creative choices and the lack of vision for the story that it really bummed me out. I want to give it a 3 out of 5.
Okay, so yeah, we're not that far off. But yeah, I agree with you in the sense of if you're a fan, you should see it as a completionist. I don't know if it really offers all that much to people who aren't fans of the show.
No, it doesn't. And I feel like that was probably its biggest opportunity failure because the world that they created is very, very interesting. I think one of the reasons why I kind of give it a couple extra brownie points is that it did a good job of reintroducing us to that world. It was really fun to be a part of again.